The topic of this video is inherently boring. So boring that I had to re-record the intro. Hopefully this falls into the interesting and useful category rather than entertaining. I'm going to be talking about the Boxer, but not so much about the Boxer, more about the various mods I've done to it and where I think we should be heading in the whole control department, as these manufacturers have not done a great job in figuring out how to make something for us humans to use these dumb fingers to interface with robots, because that's what we're doing. These are just robotic interfaces.
And one of the trends in the industry, which is really frustrating, is that radio manufacturers have kind of been competing on who can make the smallest little gimbal. And the most recent DJI radio has gimbals so tiny, might as well just use a video game controller. Just happen to have this controller right here next to me. So the video game controllers have tiny little gimbals. These are tiny. You can't fly a quad effectively with gimbals this small. It would be so sensitive and difficult to control. It's just these dumb fingers of humans, of us animals, can't do it effectively. We're just not made for that. So my longest running radio that I've used is actually this guy. It's the DJI FPV original radio, and I've kind of uses a lot. It's got some stuff rattling around inside. This radio has a couple of good things. Actually, just one good thing. It interfaces with the Vista, and you don't need anything extra. And that's the number one. It's the only real reason why I kept using it, because it was just so simple. I couldn't fiddle with another receiver module, and I just didn't want to do it. But the problem with it is that it's real chunky, and the gimbals are a lot smaller than I'm used to. So it was really hard for me to modulate things, and I actually had to reduce my overall DPS on the quad just to be able to properly fly the thing. So I just had less rotation rate in general, and I just lived with it because I was just lazy. This radio is the only one that I have left. I used to have a couple X9Ds, but they long past. This is the only radio I have left that actually has full-size gimbals on it. And it's wonderful, except that I really am not interested in having like this big thing hanging out the back anymore, because the crossfire, because I really don't need to with ELRS now, which I'll get to in a second. Not to mention that the radio is ginormously chunky, and while it's great, it's just too big. I just can't deal with it. It's just too big. This is the radio that I have loved the most because it's nice and small. It has like 95% of the range of the older big giant Tyrannus, and it kind of has everything I need, but also chunky because it's got all this stuff hanging off the back. We're just racing through the radios, and that's why I like the Boxer the best, is because it's nice and compact. It's got the ELRS built in, so I don't need anything hanging off the back. It has an enormous battery, which is lovely, and the software is fine. I mean, I don't really use the software for anything anymore these days, but I have had to modify it a bit because when it ships, it does not have full travel gimbals. So what I've done here is that I have dropped the gimbals in this controller 8.5 millimeters, but I would recommend 7 millimeter drop, not 8.5, which you'll understand why in a second. And in this particular radio, I have I originally started with these 3D printed gimbal sticks, which Brain 3D printed for me, that were just extenders, but it's really slippery, so I skipped out on those. And then I got some of these sticks, and heaven forbid they actually thread it all the way through, and they didn't do that. So I had to get a threader, a tapper, and I tapped it all the way through so that I could put it on the gimbals, but still not quite as grippy as I would like. And then I got these gimbal sticks, which were great, and because these are unfortunate M4 threads on this gimbal, I had to thread some, as you can see here, some M3 nuts to kind of get it to extend properly and for these to fit on. But now it is great, and I have done a couple other mods as well, taking off the rubber things. And I've taken off the rubber things because this allows my fingers to just get closer. So let's talk about the ideal location for the gimbals, at least in my opinion. For human hands, it's kind of, sure, it is an opinion, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure everybody flies mostly with human hands, trying to be inclusive here. But this is the radio form that I worked on several years ago, and I had a couple original ideas which are really neat that never really came out because the manufacturer just left and went out of business. The gimbals are massive. The gimbals sit really deep inside the radio, and the radio is not thick. So what that means is that the radio sits at the bottom of your hands, and then you have all this freedom to move your sticks around. And you can have long sticks, short sticks, whatever sticks, or if you're a thumber, you have lots of freedom of movement to move your hands around. And that's because the radio is not chunky. It's not so thick. It doesn't like take up your whole hand and now you have nowhere to move your thumbs. The reason why I removed these rubber things is because the thickness of them was really interfering with how low the radio sits in my hand. And with these extended sticks that are 8 or 9 millimeters extended and the dropped gimbal, which is 8 or 9 millimeters dropped into the radio, I now have really full range. And through this exercise, I've actually learned that my right hand is like a teensy bit smaller than my left hand. So my gimbal sticks are actually different heights. My right gimbal stick is just slightly shorter than my left so that I can more comfortably or more consistently reach all the extremities of the gimbals with both hands. So when I fly, it feels very, very consistent. Now, the one downside of this radio is that the top half is now still very thick. Now that I've dropped the gimbal in, I didn't really need the radio to have all this bit of plastic on top. It would be nice if we just slice it off, but I'll live with that. And yeah, so to get these in here, I had Brain 3D print me the ring, and then I had to do little mods. I just drilled holes for the screws to mount the gimbals in because I'm just way lazy. I'm sure you could find appropriate screw lengths. This little dimple back here is where I had to kind of just melt the casing a bit to make room for the travel of the actual gimbal back. And that's why I recommend 7mm drops, not 8mm drops if you're gonna do this, because you don't have to do any modifications like that. Anyways, most importantly, I now have the full comfortable range of my hand movement with gimbals that really stick in my thumbs, that don't slip at all, so that I can fly my quad. This is simply the most convenient and easiest interface I have found to fly my quad with to date, and that's really nice. That being said, there are definitely some other improvements that we could have. If you think about these gimbals as a suspension system, these have springs, but they don't have dampers. If we had a damper system built into the gimbals such that if you were to make a really fast, hard, sharp movement, you would get a lot of resistance, that would feel like you kind of have force feedback a little bit. And if you just moved it around slowly, you wouldn't really have much resistance. And the goal here would essentially be to, again, help us dumb humans with dumb fingers and dumb muscles that are not computers and are not robots interface with a robot. And by having that, you no longer have these like weird wiggles and wobbles, because the damping system will not only give you this kind of like force feedback. So when you start flying, primarily for beginners, you're not just kind of flopping the stick around and the quad is just going nuts. You kind of really sort of feel what's going on. But for the advanced pilot, you could actually do much more extreme things, like ride around in a buggy or ride around in a car that's bouncing around, and your fingers might be shaking, but the damper is stabilizing you. And because you have this large gimbal travel, a little bit of shake is not going to show up in the quad as much. It's going to be well within what any kind of stabilization software can deal with. And it's just going to make it much easier and more convenient to fly. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was informational for you guys. I'm actually very, very into this area, even though I don't have a lot of time or patience or anything to deal with it, clearly, because I won't use this terrible DJI radio for so long. But I use the Occam's razor. I use the path of least resistance. So I'll pretty much use whatever, but if I'm gonna go all out and take a radio and try to make it fit my hands, this is essentially what I would get today. And this is the only radio that I was able to do these minimal modifications to get it to be as good as it is. And I can't even explain how like luxurious it is to fly with a gimbal and a radio that fits your hand mostly, and you have so much range and travel, and there's just so much freedom of movement in the quad because it's not going to go nuts if you move your finger just 0.5 millimeter. All right, take care. Floss your teeth. Bye.